Welcome back into the Lions 24/7 podcast. I am Tyler Donahue. We continue to work our way through Penn State's second game week of the 2024 season. Third episode of the week. Our next one will be the post-game podcast when we get out of Beaver Stadium to discuss what went down between Bowling Green and Penn State. This edition is going to be to project and preview what's going to happen there on Saturday afternoon as these teams meet for a noon kickoff. You bring in Mark Brennan and Daniel Gallen. I almost reversed your last names and applied it to the other one, but happy to be with you guys once again. Last time we were together, it was on Monday. We were kind of picking up the pieces from a really impressive performance in week one. We get together every Thursday. Last week, it was not just our West Virginia game preview and players to watch, but it was also our whole season predictions and also our team MVP picks and all that. So that's not part of the equation this time, but we do have another matchup to look at. And Mark, we were on our Wednesday evening, late afternoon trip to the Penn State practice field yesterday, got about 15, 20-minute viewing window of the action, followed by James Franklin, a few different players. And coming out of that game one, I don't know if this team needed to convince itself, but there is very clearly a confidence among this group, regardless of who you're speaking with.
Yeah, I mean, and there should be, right? I mean, there were a lot of question marks. We said it going into the West Virginia game. Where was this team going to kind of be coming out of it? And I don't know that they could have played really any better overall. Now, I was the first one to say that one of the good things coming out of that game was that there were some learning points, both on offense and defense. On offense, maybe the ability to spread the ball around a little bit more. On defense, not quite as many penalties. But overall, I mean, for a game one, you have to be happy. And, the thing that I mentioned also was the fact that team played with a lot of swagger on defense last year, a lot of attitude. It was cool seeing that translated over to offense. And I think you're going to see that as these next weeks carry on, given the level of competition, to be able to carry that into the meat of the schedule in October. I think it's going to be a good thing.
Penn State's favored by about 5 touchdowns going into this week 2 matchup against Bowling Green. They stand to be heavy favorites in the next 4 games that they have in these 5 weeks. They're off next Saturday, but other than that, the next 5 weeks, 4 home games can be heavily favored. You've got Bowling Green, Kent State, Illinois, UCLA to finish off this span. Things get interesting. Trip out to Los Angeles and a lot beyond that one. But Daniel, I think if you're trying to pinpoint one really cause for optimism in the Lash building, really among Nittany Lions fans on our message board across the country, it's got to be what Andy Kotelnicki, Drew Aller, and that crew were able to accomplish offensively in Morgantown. Guy to guy, some coaches. We keep hearing just about the excitement level surrounding Andy Kotelnicki. Anthony Donka last night, the starting right tackle for this team, laughed a little bit before he said, "Oh my gosh, I love Coach K." These guys have quickly embraced him, and when you see the results in front of you, not so much an offseason of teaching and preaching, but now you're starting to see it and you get to watch the replays of it. It's sinking in for this team that they're under a new direction offensively.
I think it's one thing to be confident that something is going to work. I think it's another thing to be confident knowing that something works. And I think, like with what Mark said about the swagger that this team is playing with and carrying that forward, you look at the next couple weeks when you talk about Bowling Green and Kent State. Those are 2 opportunities to really put some good things on tape, to kind of, I don't know, for lack of a better term, hit some layups, build that confidence. And then you have Illinois and UCLA. And I think Illinois will be interesting, but those are 2 more games where you can really build up. And, now you have this working against a conference foe. And then you go right into that really tough stretch of at USC, at Wisconsin, Ohio State. I think that the way the schedule sets up, and you talk about, in some ways, James Franklin doesn't like having that Power 5 game or Big Ten game to kick things off. And I completely understand that. But at the same time, to be able to have this springboard of confidence now, as opposed to still being like, okay, you did this against 3 MAC teams and an FCS team. Let's see it against the Big Ten. You have proof of concept against a Big 12 program. And I think that that's something too that gives these players a lot of confidence. And I think that's something that'll carry forward.
We've got plenty to jump into from this week of coverage here in Happy Valley and setting the stage for the matchup. And by the way, if you missed it, our Wednesday episode of this podcast, we broke down the Bowling Green Falcons, what they're bringing to campus, kind of where their journey has been under their coaching staff with the Falcons beat reporter Michael Burwell of the Toledo Wave. So I encourage you to check that out. 15 plus minutes on Bowling Green. We're not going to rehash a lot of that. It's going to be Penn State centric here on Thursdays. But Mark, before we get into that, if folks didn't heed your advice last Thursday about our 75% offer, well, that doesn't exist anymore. But there's a second chance to jump on board and join our VIP coverage at Lions 24/7 for this entire season and all the way through next preseason camp.
Yeah, first of all, thank you to everybody who came on board. We were among the network leaders in the promotion, which is always a good thing. And also thank you to all of our previous and current subscribers. Without you, we can't do the things we do. But yeah, I mean, there's still an opportunity. The network saw that we were doing well and said, hey, people are excited about Penn State football. Let's keep something going that people can come in at a better price point, and it's going to be 60% off for the next week, or into early next week. So take advantage of it. If you haven't come on board, it's a good time. It'll take you through to next year at this time. And then also, if you're a monthly subscriber, listen, we're well over 80% in annual subscribers, which is awesome. If you're a monthly subscriber, you're going to save yourself a ton of money by going annual. And I'm just telling you, if you're a monthly subscriber, thank you. But I don't know why people do that, because everybody re-ups. You're going to re-up and re-up and re-up. Go ahead and save yourself some money by upgrading to an annual at 60% off, and you'll get that payment out of the way now, and you'll be with us through the next year. So appreciate all of our subscribers. Appreciate everybody who came on board. 60% off until early next week. So thank you, everybody.
Yeah, and once you're locked in and you're rolling as a full-time, full-paying subscriber, you also get that access to Paramount Plus because of our partnership. And that's where you'll now find Big Ten Athletics on the CBS network, and you'll find us on CBS Sports HQ. And it's a good, yeah, but it's a good relationship, and you will reap those rewards as well. So let's talk about week 2. Certainly not the kind of feeling that we had last week where, is this team going to be in the thick of an upset alert kind of moment? That would be a stunning development if that's where we are on Saturday afternoon in the press box in Beaver Stadium. But this matchup, the one beyond the bye week against Kent State, much like we viewed those Delaware and UMass games last year, it's a good time, Daniel, to take inventory of where this roster is, where the depth chart is, how much they can count on some inexperienced guys, how much they can maybe get rest to the guys who've already proven themselves as playmakers. And let's begin with an update at tight end. That was a spot last week where we saw Tyler Warren far and away lead that position as expected. You did get a co-starter situation there with Andrew Rapplier getting the initial starting nod, but he played about half the snaps as Tyler Warren. The third tight end involved was Luke Reynolds, played about a dozen snaps in his college debut, 5-star freshman that came to campus last January. But they were missing Khalil Dinkins. He was listed as out before the matchup. He was sidelined for a significant span of preseason camp. And on Wednesday, when we were back at practice, it was our first time seeing number 16 out there with the tight ends in about a month in our weekly views at this team. So, Daniel, we checked in with James Franklin afterwards. He says they're happy to have Khalil Dinkins back on the practice field in terms of getting him back into game action. They got some rust to knock off. They want to gauge where he is mentally, where he is physically. And at the end of the day, they also feel really good about Andrew Rapplier. James Franklin said that he referenced what he said last week about Tyler Warren being the most complete tight end in the country. He says that there's a blueprint in place for Andrew Rapplier to become that kind of a player for Penn State. We know they think highly of him, but the other part of this Khalil Dinkins scenario is if Dinkins can return, then maybe you can tuck away Luke Reynolds again a little bit and start to work within that red shirt parameters of the 4 games. And I know people don't want to hear that. They want to see that the kid play a lot. But there's a lot of moving pieces here, and I just kind of wanted to set it up because you've got 4 guys plus who are kind of, adrift right now in that tight end room in terms of what their job is going to be on a week-to-week basis. The only guy that doesn't apply to is Tyler Warren. He is the alpha.
Yeah, I think when you look at Khalil Dinkins coming back to this room or coming back to the field, James Franklin really wasn't definitive about what Dinkins would do if he were to come back, if he is ready. I think when you talk about knocking off rust, you do have that bye week next week and then Kent State. So there is some opportunity to really bank some rest here. At the same time, I think Bowling Green is probably a good team to knock some rust off against, to get out there and in a bit of a potentially lower stakes environment to ease yourself back in. I think that would be a good scenario for Khalil Dinkins, but it is, even if he does come back, and even if he were to come back full strength, it would be really interesting to see how all of these pieces fit together, given what James Franklin said about Andrew Rappelier and him getting that opportunity and getting as much run as he did. It seems he's someone that they're really excited about. He's someone where he's developed nicely. Things are kind of coming together a little bit and clicking for him at the college level. And so I think that the more that we see of him, the better that he's going to get. And these next couple of weeks are a great opportunity for him to play more. But with Dinkins, I think that the type of athlete he is, you can just do a lot of different things with him. You can put him in the backfield, line him up as that pseudo fullback or H back, and put him in the slot. He can be the one receiver split out wide in certain formations. He brings some versatility and some athleticism there. But it seems like it'll just be a question of how ready is he? What do you want to do with Luke Reynolds? And how much do you want to see Andrew Rappelier out there?
It seems like, Mark, that the leash would be pretty long at this point for Rappelier. He's a guy that they would have loved to have been able to play more. In fact, they were glad they didn't have to last year, but they were ready to play him if they needed to. They were certainly ready to play him in week 1. He got the start, and he told us during a Zoom call on Tuesday, I think it might have been Wednesday, but whatever it was, he told us that he expects more on his plate. He expects more of a workload. He said his primary task in this matchup at West Virginia was in the run game, and he thinks he put on the film what he needed to put on the film. But he is a very talented receiver, a very talented route runner. That's been his bread and butter before he put on those 30, 40 pounds coming out of high school into college. And so with Dinkins back, and I want to caution people, if Dinkins is back this week and you don't see him for more than just a few snaps, he's trying to knock off rust. I don't expect Dinkins to all of a sudden jump back in and be your tight end 2 right off the bat. But if Dinkins comes back, works his way in, he's got a dogfight, Mark, because I just don't – I know Rappelier is not going to let up. And I just think unless he makes some significant assignment mistakes or an injury pops up, this staff is going to have a hard time pulling that leash back in and getting Rappelier to the sideline.
Well, no, we saw it in the blue-white game, right? I mean, Rappelier was effectively the first team tight end because Tyler Warren wasn't out there. Dinkins came in after him. So, yeah, and I don't think you could discount what Reynolds has done in such a short period of time. It's Tyler. I mean, it's the job that they've done, Ty Howell at that position has been just unbelievable. Ty came into a really good situation here at Penn State, but he kept it rolling. And now the level of recruiting and the level of development has just been absolutely unbelievable. But with Rapp, I really believe that there was a concerted effort last week, because if you look at the players who were successful, they were established guys. I mean, we can joke around about Harrison Wallace being a breakout guy, but he was kind of a known commodity. So, but I think that was by design. Set that foundation, and it wasn't just at tight end, it was at receiver, it was at running back where we didn't see a lot other than the established guys. And I think now in these next few weeks we're going to see that start to expand to these other people, because it worked with the established guys. They set the tone, and I think Rapp's going to be a guy. I'm not sure I'm going to pick him as my player to watch here, but I would not be surprised if he has a big game this week, just because you probably don't need a ton from Tyler Warren. And I think you want to start getting a guy like Rappelier, who, was seen in practice. We saw in the blue-white game in that key 2-minute drive at the end of the game where they went to him multiple times in key situations, including for a 30-yard touchdown. You want to get him so he's comfortable with the ball in his hands out there in front of all those fans, 100,000 fans in game situations. I think he will be, but let's see.
James Franklin and Andy Kotelnicki, they view Khalil Dinkins as a weapon when he's available, when he's full go. I think it's really indicative of where the room's at. You miss a week of practice, you miss a month of practice, you're gonna have a hard time. You can't. There's a lot of teams out there that would lose a Khalil Dinkins and then be begging for him to get back as soon as possible because they need to plug him in to their plans. But right now, because of the tight end spot, it's just you miss a day, you miss a few sessions, you could fall behind and have some ground to make up. And we hope they can get back physically and mentally to where he is and get a look at him moving forward, whether it's this Saturday or into September. Daniel, elsewhere at linebacker, wasn't as rosy of an outlook for us at our watch because we didn't see Tamir Robinson on the practice field. Again, it's a 15, 20-minute window. We don't see the entire practice, but we didn't see Tamir Robinson with those linebackers. And he exited early last week, as we addressed on the Monday podcast. He got injured on special teams coverage, apparently. He was the special teams player of the week. Penn State staff made that pick. And we only saw 4 linebackers really play against West Virginia. Tyler Elsdon was at 20-plus snaps, and then the 3 guys that we consider the starters were all over 40 snaps: Tony Rojas, Kobe King, and Dom DeLuca. We have really, for a while now, penciled in Tamir Robinson as the 4th or 5th part of this plan. So his availability here, especially in a game where we don't think they got to go a long ways with Rojas, DeLuca, and King, it becomes a little more paramount, I think, as a storyline.
Yeah, I think that you look at this linebacker depth, and it's one of those things where you start sort of picking away at it. Back in January, I think we felt pretty good about things, but you start to pick away one guy here, another guy here, and suddenly the picture changes pretty greatly. And I do think that overall, with the amount of absences that are in that room right now, there aren't too many programs across the country that I think would still be feeling good at this point. If you lose that many guys, I think that's always something to keep in mind where at some of these positions with injuries and depth issues, there's a certain point where it doesn't matter who you are. If you're Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State, it can sneak up on you a little bit. But I do think that these next 2 weeks are a good opportunity for some younger players to get their feet wet. I know that we would probably be talking about Tamir Robinson as a player to watch against Bowling Green, against Kent State, but I think that you shift the focus a little bit. Anthony Specca, someone that we've gotten some pretty good reviews on from his teammates and what they've seen from him. I feel like he is someone that we could see or we could need to see against Bowling Green. And then Dakari Nelson, I think we're still kind of waiting to get that look at him at that Sam linebacker. He's someone where, the feedback for him has been really, really great with just how natural this has been for him and how he's just really, really taken to it, which I think has been pretty interesting. And so to see him out there getting a lot of run, I think would be good for this defense. But then you keep going, and it's probably going to be a good day for the walk-ons. I think if you get to that point in the game, and you want to get to that point in the game, especially if you only have 4 guys and you really need to keep them healthy. So that's going to be an interesting position to watch, how they manage things moving forward. If we see Robinson at least suit up or do warm-ups, what is he on that pregame availability report? That'll be something to monitor at 10 a.m. Eastern, and then we can go from there and try to figure out what we're actually going to see on the field.
Some feedback that we've gotten with Robinson is that this isn't a long-term situation, but like you mentioned it earlier, you got a bye week around the corner here. If there's a little bit of an iffy situation where, maybe it makes sense to get the guy through the bye week and to be really fully healthy. But Mark, this ultimately, we got to see guys go out there and play the position, and you don't want Tony Rojas going 50 snaps plus when you're winning by a bunch of points. And so all due respect to the walk-ons, a lot of our conversation is about the former blue chip recruits that we've covered for several years. And we will get to see a lot of those walk-ons. Dom DeLuca used to be one of them, and look at him now. He's a 2-time team captain and playing a ton of football. But I think really Anthony Specca is in that spotlight this week. He's a guy that was wearing his own jersey number when we saw him on the practice field Wednesday. He was wearing a scout team jersey number last week. He was on the travel roster for West Virginia, but didn't enter the matchup. He was wearing that number 40. He was roaming around with the linebackers, and he's somebody because of he showed up physically, mentally, and mature and all ready to go. It kind of led you to believe, okay, this guy can make an impact. And now once Wiley's not back on the field yet, what we learned about Kavion Keys being dismissed from the program, and now Tamir Robinson being sidelined, it goes from like, well, maybe you can sneak Anthony Specca a few snaps here and there to Anthony Specca is probably going to have to play quite a bit on Saturday.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, do they try to still redshirt him and hope that Dakari Nelson comes
They
up?
can. I mean, I think they
Because
can still
listen, I'm looking at a West Virginia team last year that led all Power 5 at the time, right? There were still 5 then. All Power 5 teams in rushing yards per game. In Penn State with 4 linebackers playing. Do I have that right? They only played 4 linebackers in the entire game?
Tamir had 1 snap, and then everybody else had the rest, yeah.
So effectively playing 4 linebackers, the quote-unquote starters. They only started 2, but we know who the 3 starters are, and Tyler Elston, and they held him to 2.3 yards per carry.
Yeah.
So I think, and kind of looking ahead to some other things we're going to talk about, clearly the 3 safety look is a big part of what Tom Allen does, and they have safeties who are good enough. And you look at the tackle numbers they built up, 21 tackles between your 2 quote unquote starters. And are they going to need to risk ruining somebody's red shirt at this point of the season? I just don't know. So it's going to be.
Let me clarify, Mark. I'm talking about Specca needing to have a lot on his plate this Saturday, not 2 Saturdays from now, not 3, not the rest of the season. I just get the sense, because the guys you're talking about, yeah, they did a great job, but what are you gaining if you're up by 35 points and you've got 5th-year senior Tyler Elsdon playing the mic? I know that it's great. You want that guy to get run.
You're rewarding your walk-ons.
Oh, you reward your walk-ons, but I think if Anthony Specca is physically and mentally prepared, and it sounds like he does check a lot of those boxes, I mean, I think because you are confident you're getting Tamir Robinson back, you are confident that Dakari Nelson is going to be playable option for you. He's already got a red shirt on his plate, and you think that Keon Wiley can get back in the mix later. To me, this just seems like a very smart window to give Anthony Specca a longer look for your evaluation, for his confidence. And ultimately, it could be something for him to tuck away in his pocket later in the season when he's not seeing much action.
And let me look at it. Let me reverse engineer that and look at it a different way. So right now you have 4 guys who are healthy that you can count on. What if one of those guys is injured 2 weeks from now? And, for Tamir, it's a longer thing. And I mean, I just wondered, are you better off saving those potential games for a guy like Specca, given how thin you are at this point? I mean,
this is the dance they're doing. And I mean, this is the dance they're doing.
Yeah.
In all coaching staffs around the country right now, especially when they're going into these matchups where they expect the margin of victory will be large. And they've got this group of freshmen. They don't know who's going to maintain red shirt, but James Franklin has said it's only 2 guys that have the green light, and that's out of 25-ish. So there's a lot of ways this could go. I'm with you. I think that's kind of the staff internal dialogue that you're having right now. I just feel like, Daniel, you can weigh in. To me, the roster, the way it's set up, if Tamir Robinson is not available specifically, and we haven't seen Kari Jackson in the last couple of weeks, he's the other freshman linebacker. There are walk-ons, but I just think that you're running out of bodies, and it's also a huge point to have valuable snaps that you can evaluate as a staff and really go through with a fine-tooth comb with Specca. But I mean, maybe he doesn't play at all, and it's because of the red shirts on their mind. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. I mean, when Mark talked about rewarding the walk-ons, like the one thing that popped into my head was something we'll talk about a little bit later, but like the running back situation last year, where it was like, okay, finally we're going to see Cam Wallace and London Montgomery. Like, we have to see these guys. We have to know if they can play in game reps. They need these game reps in the non-conference. And then it was Tyler Holsworth or icing out the games.
Tank Smith, come on.
Yeah, and Tank Smith.
I have it open right in front of me. I have the Delaware game, and I'm looking at the guys who played. Tank Smith, Patrick Williams. So yeah, it could go either way. But anyway, I didn't want to. You can't diss Tank Smith. Come on.
No, I appreciate that. So that was just something that popped into my head, where I think that it seems like the perfect thing, and this is a little bit of a different situation because of the injury element of it. It's not like that running back room at that point last year was the stack. That was the full deck that you were going with. So I think that it is easy when you look at these games to be like, okay, this guy, these freshmen, we're going to see them. We want to see them. But you really, like Mark said, I mean, you can't forget about those walk-ons and how they might factor into the plans here.
Let me ask you this, Mark. Who do you think is more likely to see 20 snaps on Saturday, Anthony Specca or Dakari Nelson?
Dakari Nelson.
Okay. Well, and I just want to note, Dakari Nelson has worked his way up that linebacker line on drills that we've witnessed in a hurry. He was pacing at the very tail of it a couple of weeks ago when he made that move, and now he's toward the front than he is closer to the back, and for whatever that's worth, based on what we saw. But I think I'm with you. Maybe this is a chance for Nelson to get out. Maybe they both play a bunch, but we'll see what the snap counts look at the
That's
end.
the fun of these games, right? I mean, we think it's going to be lopsided, and monitoring it in the fourth quarter, which we'll be doing. Like, we may be the only ones who are really paying close attention, but I am going through last year's Delaware game, and I'm not saying this team is at Delaware's level, but some of the true freshmen who played were Donko, Williams, Chimdy. Those guys did play, but a lot of the walk-ons played. Jan Malort, Estrella, a bunch of those guys played. So was that the week in practice that Malort – I'm calling him Malort. How do you pronounce his name?
You're going down the rabbit hole now.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Was that the week that he had a blown assignment in practice?
Probably. Yeah. Where he was on our radar.
It's an inside joke. I'm sorry.
Mark, let's move away from the linebacker. Let's move away from the inside jokes and talk safeties. Because I want to throw this to Daniel. He just got off a call with me on Poindexter. Anthony Poindexter was kind enough to give us about 15 minutes here on a Thursday. And he's got to be a happy guy right now because he's got a hell of a room when you look at who the stars are right now. And then there's a lot of promising talent toward the bottom of that depth chart that we're going to learn a lot about in the years ahead. But Daniel, this has really been, I think, defensively, the central focus is what the safeties did. KJ Winston was Big Ten Defensive Player of the Week. And, of course, Jalen Reed was the staff's pick for Player of the Game on the defensive side of the ball. You spoke with Reed. You spoke with Wheatley. You've heard from Poindexter. Give us the synopsis of what this week is the buzz is around the safety bunch.
I think I was going over things and I realized that Anthony Poindexter was not asked about KJ Winston, who was the Big Ten Defensive Player of the Week, who's this guy that's getting all this first round buzz coming into the year. But I think I think some of it is kind of a testament to the improvement in the job that someone like Jalen Reed did, and kind of where Zachy Wheatley is and how important we think Wheatley can be to that room moving forward. But I think the overall feedback, Anthony Poindexter said that it's really great to hear all the good things people are saying, but at the same time, they got to go play those games. They have to be out there on Saturdays and keep performing. But I think that he realizes that he has something pretty good in that room. He is really complimentary of Winston, Reed, and Wheatley. He kind of took every question to be about those three guys when he was asked sort of the more general things about the safety group. But I think that some of the praise that we continue to hear for Jalen Reed is just how cerebral of a player that he is. Anthony Poindexter said that Reed is one of the smartest players he's ever been around in terms of the processing aspect. And that, he has, but at the same time, he has a unique ability to play both the second and the third level, which we've seen from that line position. And, just how Reed was all over the field on Saturday. And with Wheatley, he said that they, had a meeting at the end of last year. They had a long talk and told him what he needed to do. And Poindexter said that instead of moping or pouting, that he went out and did it, that they saw in winter workouts that he was taking whatever they told him to heart, and that he's tweaked a few things and they're seeing the results from it right now. And I think that was a little bit of I don't know if an unknown is the right word for it, but Wheatley was someone who was not completely on the radar at the end of last year. And you come in and you're talking about playing this 3 safety set and putting a lot of potential on those guys, or a lot of responsibility on those guys. And I think that on paper and what we knew about Wheatley in terms of his potential, it made a lot of sense and it all fit. But when you tried to square it with the performance from last year, I think that you did kind of have to be like, okay, we're going to need to see something from this guy. And we heard from James Franklin in the spring that the light has gone on based on what Poindexter said today, that's really continued. And I think that we'll see at some point, we'll see that takeaway king pop up and make those types of plays that we've really known him for from behind the scenes.
the way his teammates are talking about him this week, Jalen Reed, he can walk around town with his chest out. I mean, it is
Yes.
remarkable to hear the way he's being described. It's not surprising. We know there's a lot of respect, but he has clearly entered another realm based on some of the feedback we've gotten. AJ Harris saying that was kind of a calming influence for him before the game, someone who gave him some good encouragement before he went out and played really well in his first start at cornerback. And just generally, AJ Harris said, we watched the film and this guy's popping off the film, the whole time, just like we saw it on TV. Those guys, when they go in for film study, number one was flying around as well. Let's stay in the defensive backfield, Mark, and let's go over to Terry Smith's bunch at cornerback. James Franklin said after practice on Wednesday evening that he doesn't remember having depth at cornerback like this, and completely validates what we heard from Terry Smith back in the early days of April when he mentioned back then that he felt like this had a chance genuinely to be a deeper group than they had last year when they had 3 all-conference players at the top of the pecking order at cornerback. Here they are. It's a revamped starting lineup, maybe a rotational starting lineup, because James Franklin says those spots are up for grabs on a weekly basis in that room. But it's the 2 transfers that step up, and then you see a lot of Cam Miller behind them, and then you see some of Elliot Washington. He's gotten a lot of praise from James Franklin a couple times this week, and then we know they got plenty of other pieces. What do you think about this unit? And in this particular game on Saturday, it feels like a chance to really flex the depth we've heard of. I would love to see more of Aldavian Collins, who got more buzz than anybody in that room this offseason and kind of surprisingly only played a dozen defensive snaps in week 1.
Yeah, I think I said earlier in the week, I love the way the transfers came in and played with that same attitude we saw at Penn State last season, even though they weren't here.
Mark, I think your mic is off.
I'm sorry. The one thing I loved was the way those 2 transfers came in and played with the same attitude that we saw out of the Penn State defense last year. Even though they weren't here, you could see how well they fit in. And I'm with you. I mean, we heard from Aldavian Collins. Terry Smith told us about him. A bunch of people on defense told us about him, about how tough he is, about how he gets after it, his work ethic. So would not be surprised if we see more and more of him. And then Cam Miller, seeing him in different spots. I think he played a little bit of that lion. So is it as deep as they've been? I mean, they were pretty good last year. I mean, they were pretty deep last year. So for Franklin to say that is, he must really like what he's seeing. But when you're able to bring in transfers like that who make an immediate impact, I think it kind of speaks to what they've done in the portal. They've done a really good job at identifying areas of need. Listen, everybody was thinking this is going to be a little bit of a rebuilding year in that cornerback room, and it just turns out that they reloaded. I also think that speaks to the fact of what Terry Smith is doing, and that players at other schools can look at what Penn State's doing at cornerback in general, who they're sending into the league, and what Terry Smith's all about as a coach.
It was a heavy load for both Kimber and Harris in week 1. I don't think there'll be heavy loads for a lot of starting defenders. And by the way, if you're a Bowling Green fan for whatever reason tuning into this and you feel disrespected, you probably should. I apologize. We've been talking a lot about the end of this game and getting guys in, but that's where it is from our perspective. Daniel, let's finish off with one note from our weekly coverage before we talk about predictions for this specific game and players to watch. That is Omari Evans. He was available to us after practice on Wednesday. You got a chance to hear from him, speak with him, and that was about a week after you wrote a story on James Franklin's comments that he could be ready to take off for his career as a junior. We saw him go for launch, deep target down the field. Felt like it could be a tone-setting moment for this offense moving forward. Their aggressive nature at the end of the half led to another touchdown. What did you hear from Omari Evans? Was there a tone shift at all from what you heard from him before kickoff?
Well, Omari Evans made it clear that he did not push off when he caught his 55-yard pass. He said that was not OPI. He was the one being held, and he just had to free himself up there. But I thought it was interesting.
Or was that an opening statement from him?
I think someone asked him,
Okay.
or
I asked him about the catch.
About the
and
catch.
He just added that and I'm like, so are you catching crap about that from people? And he just said, yeah, I was being held. It wasn't me.
Okay.
Yeah. But I thought it was interesting too. He said that was the second time in the game that they ran that play. I think that I remember the play earlier where he was running open deep and the protection broke down up front. So Drew Aller couldn't get the ball to him. But I do think that that's something just kind of to note where something worked in terms of the scheme, the execution didn't necessarily work, but Penn State, Andy Kotelnicki noted that, then they were able to come back to it in a big spot and get
What
a
a
big
concept.
result. I know. But yeah, I think that Omari Evans, there's a bit of an air of confidence about him. I think that he's always been a more soft-spoken guy, especially in those larger media scrums. I think he was a little bit more talkative when I had him one-on-one at media day. But he answers your question, and I think that he said that I asked him if he felt validated by what James Franklin said, what he was talking about coming into the year, and then going out and doing it. And he said that that felt really good, to get that on tape and to show what he can do. He said that when he comes in every day, he knows that Andy Kotelnicki is going to want to use his speed, figure out how to use what he does well in this offense. And so, he's someone where I do think that you need to see him string it together a couple weeks in a row, to really, really get the feeling that he's taken a big step. But in terms of how you start a year, I think that it would be really hard to ask for more if you're Omari Evans, especially given the few number of passes that were in that game. That I think he had a decent snap count, but it just seemed like he made the most of his opportunity out there. And I think that he feels good about it. He's shown what he can do. And I think that he feels like he'll keep getting that opportunity, which I think is also big.
Omari Evans now 3 consecutive regular season games with an explosive play down the field. I believe it was 25 yards against Rutgers, 60 against Michigan State Black Friday, and then a big chunk down to the field, setting up Harrison Wallace touchdown. So those obviously follow the firing of Mike Yurcich in the first 10 regular season games last year. Any guesses on his longest reception?
7 yards or 4 yards.
It was 5 yards was his longest reception. He had 1 for 5 and 1 for 4 before catching 1 for 25 after Mike Yurcich was fired. So that's been a direct correlation, I think, since we saw the OC change. Nick Singleton and his success in the explosive play department has been a direct correlation that we've seen since the offensive coordinator change. There are a lot of other dynamics involved here, but I think those are 2 guys we can specifically point to that are just executing and producing at a different level since Mike Yurcich was shown the door after that Michigan matchup. Let's talk about this matchup as best we can from Penn State's angle. I think, Mark, you always start with the psychology in a matchup like this. You're coming off a really impressive week 1 win where, it was an adverse situation. You knew you had to be amped up to match the energy going onto the road. Now you got the friendly confines of Beaver Stadium. It always feels nice to be home. You've got a team that's coming in as a 5 touchdown underdog. You've got a bye week ahead of you. Maybe you have some family plans to get together with friends. This is like, I'm not saying it's a trap game because I don't think it is, but we're going to see how Penn State is. It a little sleepy looking coming out of the gates, or is this team fired up and exhibiting the same energy that we saw down in Morgantown?
Yeah, and I think it's important they play well early, not in the sense that you're going to lose the game if you don't, but I think just to show that wasn't a fluke and just to show the level of seriousness that you're approaching this season with. You can't be fancying yourself a college football playoff contender if you're going to come into a game like this and sleepwalk through the first half. So number 1, I think, is just playing with the same sort of intensity, a little bit more poised than you showed last week, especially on defense with with all the penalties, knock on wood, prevent injuries. And then as always, I think just do not make stupid turnovers. Just keep the positive vibes kind of going. And again, knock on wood, everybody stays healthy. I think that's kind of the biggest thing for them. But I think psychologically they'll be okay. But if they're not, that may say a little bit of something about their leadership. So this is a little good little test for leadership coming off a big win.
These are the tests and little milestone moments that James Franklin loves to take the temperature of his team. He loves to kind of know what do we need to concentrate on next week coming out of a game like this. If they win by 40, there's going to be things he points to. And you talk about sleepwalking. I mean, Daniel, this is a Bowling Green team that scored 38 points on the road at Georgia Tech in an upset last year. They also had to score at 14-6 at halftime in Ann Arbor during their trip to Michigan last September. Michigan ended up taking care of business in the second half. But they have been in some environments. And in fact, in 2 weeks from now, as we heard from their beat reporter in our last podcast, They're going down to Texas A&M for another one of these kind of marquee matchups, and before they tuck away into their MAC schedule. But Daniel, when you look at this one, they're going to want to run. That's how they got it done on the ground. Got it done a lot last year when they found their success. They were a 7-5 team during the regular season, and they had Terrion Stewart go for 160 and 3 touchdowns against an FCS opponent on the road for them. That plus an opening kickoff return for a touchdown really put them out of reach in week 1 against a team from a different level. But can they try to establish a run against Penn State? Sure. Is there much hope of it? Based on what we saw last week, good luck to the Falcons.
I think that these types of games are a really good measuring stick for all areas of your team, because if something pops up against Bowling Green, there's a chance that it could pop up against Illinois or USC or Wisconsin. I invoked it in my prediction, but 2021 Villanova game, it's definitely a lesson I think that I've learned in covering a team, when what you see in the non-conference and you maybe try to hand wave it away pops up later on in the season. So I think that
Daniel, in that case, it was they couldn't run the ball, right?
Yes.
They couldn't run the ball with authority against the Wildcats out of the FCS. And at that point, you're running out of benefit of the doubt, and it never resurfaced the rest of the way.
Yeah, I think at that point we were kind of like, it's a bit of a letdown. I think it was the week after the Auburn game, like, oh yeah, like they'll be fine. And then a couple weeks later, you're in Iowa, and things are decidedly not fine. But so I think that you want to see a well-rounded performance, and I think that if something doesn't work or is not working the same way, you can really look at why right here. But this Bowling Green team, I'm really intrigued by them. I did not pick them to keep this game close, but you look at the job that Scott Loeffler has done there. I mean, it looked like for a while it was just not going to work out at all. I think his first 3 years were bad, even by kind of wilderness of the MAC standards. and I mean, this is a Bowling Green program that won 10 games back in 2015 under Dino Babers. I saw that team. I covered that team and saw how it helped end Randy Edsall's Maryland tenure. But this is a program that has had pockets of success, and with Loeffler, it kind of looked like it just wasn't going to work out. And he's got a foundation there. They've figured something out these past 2 years. And I think that you want to have that on your radar coming into this year. I mean, I think that they're a better program than what you'll see from Kent State in 2 weeks. And so I'm very curious to see what kind of issues pop up for Penn State, how they adjust to it, and how they fix it. I think that that's something I'm definitely going to be interested in.
Mark, we spent a lot of time this week talking about the momentum that Penn State was able to develop at West Virginia, but not every area, not every player carries their own momentum into this matchup. And you'd like to see some momentum-inducing moments on Saturday before they hit their early bye week. And I think the name I go to is Katron Allen. You know, he had that 20-yard touchdown reception, which he did the heavy lifting on that play, finished it with a lot of physicality, as he often does, and scored that touchdown. But 10 carries for 20 yards on the ground, that's not a Katron Allen stat line that we're accustomed to kind of seeing. I'd be surprised if he doesn't start. You know, that's the way it's worked forever. They had Nick Singleton get the first snap at West Virginia. I believe Katron Allen checked in for the second play of the game in for Andrew Rapplier. So he was involved fast, but I think he'll probably be the official starter. And then I think they're going to probably get the ball in his hands early and give him a chance to beat Katron Allen, because when he's right, if you attach everything that we saw this offense do last week, and that's part of the equation, we know what Katron Allen is when he's right, because he's been right for the last 2 years consecutively. And so I think building that momentum with him out of the backfield is something I'll be looking for against Bowling Green.
Yeah, first of all, he's going to be fine. I mean, as you said, Tyler, we've seen enough of him. When you're in a game like that, not every single thing is going to click. The one thing that I didn't like, and I'm just going to be straight here, toward the end of that game, his body language, he was sitting on a bench by himself, looked like he was down in the dumps. Some players were coming over to him and patting him on the back. I don't think he had anything to be down in the dumps about. I mean, that's my point of that. I mean, he didn't look angry or anything. He just looked a little disappointed. And listen,
and you're not the only beat reporter who's referenced this in conversation this week.
Yeah, well, I mean, I was right there. It was right in front of us. So it was hard not to see it. and I'm not trying to be critical of the guy, but I think this entire team is going to have to realize that there is going to be give and take. I would not be at all surprised if there's a game where Katron Allen rushes for 120 yards and Nick Singleton has 18 or something. Opposing defenses are going to have to pick their poison, and it's okay. And that's where I thought Franklin's comments about Julian Fleming really hit home. That, okay, he wasn't getting the ball, but he was still out there doing his job. And Katron was out there doing his job too. He was blocking. He was doing all the things that he needed to do. Caught the ball, scored a touchdown, made a play in space. So I don't think he had anything to be down about. And I agree with you. I'm probably foreshadowing where I may go a little bit later in this, but I would not be at all surprised if Katron Allen has a big game this week. Not that they're going to need a big game out of him, but I think just in terms of, hey, listen, for whatever reason, he was a little bit down. The coaching staff knows that, and they know how to deal with these players.
Now, the other name you mentioned, Julian Fleming, he had 35 snaps last week. That was tied for the most among receivers, along with Harrison Wallace. And then Caden Saunders is the other wide receiver, though, I wanted to bring up to you, Daniel. We talked about them a bit earlier in the week, but now we've gone back on the practice field. We saw Caden Saunders repping with the receivers. We did see that last week, too, but now that's 2 consecutive weeks, we think, logged in offensive work, and maybe he becomes more of a factor, or maybe he's another one of those guys that they say, let's let him return punts and let's get him through the bye week and then unleash him as a receiver. But what would you like to see from Caden Saunders if he is a go on offense? And then what are your expectations for Julian Fleming, a guy who, as James Franklin alluded to, did a lot of the dirty work at West Virginia in terms of the blocking and route running and distracting the defense? He played a lot out of the slot, probably more than we anticipated. More than half his snaps were out of the slot. What are your expectations there?
I think with Caden Saunders, if you see him on offense, you want to see him do something with the ball in his hands. You want to see him get the ball, maybe see where he's at physically. If they do put him out there and try to have him in a role that's bigger than just catch the punt, don't drop it, fair catch, do your job basically. And so I think that if he is at the point where he can get the ball and get into space, I'd be really curious to see what that looks like, especially in this offense, because we've highlighted him as for a while now as someone who can really benefit from what Andy Kotelnicki does. I think with Fleming, I think my expectation is to see a little bit more of the same from what we saw from him last week. But the way that football and sports in general work sometimes is you get rewarded for doing the dirty work, doing that job, making things happen. I think that a lot of times the things sort of even out over time. You can call it karma if you want, anything like that. And I think that the players on the team are aware of it too. I think that Drew Aller is definitely aware of what Julian Fleming does. And so I think that Fleming is someone who can maybe see some of that come back around over the course of a game. I mean, I don't think that they'll be forcing it to him just to get him a touchdown just because, even though that would be cool in his first game as a Penn State wide receiver at Beaver Stadium, considering where we were in 2019 and 2020 with him. But I think that he's someone who things will balance out, and you do things the right way, it can come back around for you in a good way.
I want to take a moment real quick, because before we got to 2019, 2020, him going to Ohio State, we had 2018 when he was the hottest new kid on the block in Pennsylvania. And we saw him, I think Grace Brennan may have gotten some shots of it. He was hanging out pregame in the tunnel with Micah Parsons, who at that time was the ascending Micah Parsons that everyone knows, but he was relatively early in his freshman year at that point. So it felt like you were watching kind of the next version of Micah, because at that point, Julian was on his way to becoming the number 1 receiver recruit in the country. And you had Penn State fans gathering around them, yelling stuff to Julian, and he was a wanted man. And I remember, interviews with Julian coming out of that game and others, and just feeling that sense for how Happy Valley was calling to him. And it didn't make sense for him. And to Penn State, in his credit, they didn't burn bridges with each other when this thing came to a close. And we've told that story before on the podcast. We won't tell it again, but he's here. He's happy, and the staff is really happy to have him. And so now I know he's going to have a big group in that audience. I know he's in that crowd. And it would be quite something if they did get him involved on that first possession. I think you hear a really strong reaction from this crowd, because beyond just his family and friends or whoever is going to be there, I think Penn State fans in general have a better appreciation of maybe what he went through at Ohio State, how he's grown up, and how Penn State interpreted his whole recruitment versus how they viewed him when he came to campus in a Buckeyes uniform a couple different times. So, Mark, you were part of that coverage with me back in the day. I mean, he was at the top of everybody's wish list. And at that point, I think he still had a couple more high school seasons to go, but he really was following the footsteps of a guy like Parsons.
Yeah, I mean, remember we saw him at camp? He was like lighting up Gonzaga and DeMatha, and he's from a little school here in Pennsylvania, and the job he was doing was amazing. Tyler, as you say that, I wonder, do they announce him as a starter in this game? How cool would that be? You know what I mean? And that's no offense to anybody else. But I mean, we do know that Liam Clifford was announced as a starter in every game last year. And did he start maybe one? But regardless, it would be cool if they announced him as a starter, because I think it is cool to see how this has come full circle. And I could only imagine what that would mean to his mom and his grandparents and everybody else. I think it would be a really nice thing to do. So yeah, hopefully they do that. I think it'd be cool. But it's been I mean, the portal is a whole different thing. I mean, there were times when, years ago when this sort of thing would happen. And, it actually draws to mind Loeffler when he was an assistant at Michigan, came into Pennsylvania and got Chad Henne when everybody thought that Chad Henne was going to Penn State. And I think to this day, Chad Henne's probably enemy number one. That was probably one of the bigger losses. Terrell Pryor was another one of guys who ended up elsewhere in the Big Ten from Pennsylvania. And to see that actually happened this time and for it to come full circle, I agree, man. It's just really nice to see.
We'll see. A great point. I didn't even think about him maybe showing up and introducing himself as a starter, but that could be a really strong gesture. Not to say he hasn't earned it. Again, he was tied with Harrison Wallace for the most snaps last Saturday. I know a lot of people looked at the box score and came to the message board or on Twitter. They were like, "Did he play?" Like, yeah, he played. He played a lot.
They were texting me during the game. People were texting me. It's like, people, my friends who are fans, do you realize I'm actually working during the game? It's like, hey, Brennan, what's going on with Julian Fleming? It's like, hold on a second. I'm dealing with a lightning delay here. Let me get this done.
Oh man! Well, the last guy.
It wasn't Dave. Okay,
the last guy I wanted to make sure we got to before we each pick our players to watch here is Sanders Sahaydak. But he's coming to Beaver Stadium after missing a long distance field goal, 46-yarder down in West Virginia late in the game. May not have been a high pressure in the game situation, but I'd imagine it felt high pressure for Sanders Sahaydak, considering the short leash he had last year, getting benched at halftime of game one. Daniel, we fully expect Sahaydak to be the first kicker involved against Bowling Green. We've referenced earlier this week, might it make some sense for James Franklin to get looks at other guys in other situations over the course of September? We'll see. But Sahaydak would probably be able to control his own destiny here. This is one where if they could win by 5 touchdowns or 6 touchdowns, but he has a rough day, it's going to be one of the primary talking points going into the bye week.
Definitely. I think that you want to see something positive out of Sanders Sahaydak out there. You want to see him do something that can build his confidence. And I am interested to see how they split things up, how they use these different kickers, Chase Meyer, Ryan Barker, how you sort that out, because while James Franklin said that they have a ton of confidence in Sanders Sahaydak on Monday, he wasn't directly asked if Sanders Sahaydak was still the starting kicker. Franklin said that he has confidence in Sahaydak and thinks that he'll make the next one that he goes out there and attempts. Is that going to be Saturday? I do think that he deserves a chance if he has performed the way that he has in camp these past 2 years. I think that you have to try to get it in game, and I think that this is a good opportunity to get it there. So we'll see. I mean, I think you're definitely right that if Penn State covers the spread, but you look back and you see like 1 of 3 on field goals or 0 for 2 or even 1 of 2, depending on the circumstances, I think it's really going to be a bigger question mark going in, because I've repeated, I say it so many times, but when you're at this level, you just can't lose games on the margins. You can't lose 3 points here, 2 points there. it's just not something that is championship level football. So, and we'll see what this looks like. Maybe the Bowling Green defense comes out inspired, stops a couple Penn State drives at around the 20. So it's not quite go for it territory, but we'll see what this actually looks like Saturday.
All right, let's dive into our players to watch. I'm adding a little bit of extra flavor to this one, guys. I know I didn't alert you on it, but I want your initial player to watch, whoever you wrote down there, but also a younger and inexperienced component of the roster that you think will get out there in the second half. It could be someone we already referenced, maybe someone we didn't, but give us a prominent name or whoever you had, and then give us another player. And I think we're starting with you here, Daniel.
I think that the overall player to watch that I had was Dejon Lane. We saw him out there both on special teams and on defense against West Virginia. I don't put him in that young, inexperienced category, even though he is, because we know he's a green light. And so I think that this is the opportunity, if this game goes the way that we expect it to, for him to get a ton of run, to get some really valuable experience and to put some things on film. I mean, 6'2", 211, can run. Like, I think he could be a lot of fun back there. Anthony Poindexter sort of talked about the chain that they have going on at the safety spot, where you have Jalen Reed, who played with Jalen Brisker and Tig Brown, and then you have KJ Winston, who played with Tig Brown, Keaton Ellis, and Jalen Reed, and now you have Dejon Lane coming in and getting to play with Jalen Reed and KJ Winston, and the example that sets and that standard that is really passed along. So I'm excited to see what Lane can do early. I do think we'll see him. And then for the younger, inexperienced players, I mean, Anthony Ivy and Tyler Johnson, like, let's see something. I think that this is a good opportunity for that. I am excited to potentially see Tyseer Denmark and Josiah Brown, but I think that given what we've seen in practice, who's in their own numbers instead of scout team numbers, and who we saw out on the field at different points against West Virginia, Johnson and Ivy are kind of in that, when James Franklin talks about filling out that, mythical 3 across 2 deep, like, those are guys that if you want to fill that out at this point, you need them to step up. So what can they do? How are they with Drew Aller? What's kind of there for them? Can they break through now in year 3, or at least give some signs that, okay, these are guys that you can put out there in a tough situation, or, against Ohio State, against Washington, that type of game.
I'll start with the guy we haven't seen much of yet. We haven't seen any of him in game action. I'm sorry. I'm jumping the gun, Mark. I cut you off. I'm sorry. Bad host. Yeah. Bad host move. I'll write that in my notes. I apologize.
If you really want to go, you can. I'll adjust.
No, it's okay. I'd love to hear what you have to say first.
As the player to watch, I'm checking out the box score from Bowling Green Fordham, and our man Julius Loveridge rushed 16 times for 112 yards, 7 yards per carry for Fordham.
They gave up a lot of yards to Fordham, folks. If
our guy Julius is rushing for that many yards, I'm anxious to see what an angry Katron Allen is going to do. And he's really not angry, but a motivated Katron Allen. Again, we talked about, maybe things didn't click for him in that first game, but I have a feeling, I agree with you, Tyler, that they'll continue flip-flopping starters. He'll get the start. I think he's going to get a bunch of carries, and I find it difficult to believe that this sort of defense is going to be able to kind of hold him in check. So I know the temptation is to go with some of the younger players, but I think it's important to get him. I'm not worried about him not playing well this season, but I think it would be good for him and the offense to get him kind of going. And then over on defense, I'm going to go back to our linebacker discussion. Will we see Specka? Won't we see Specka? I'm not sure, but I do know this much. It's important for them to get Dakari Nelson a bunch of snaps. You're moving him from safety to linebacker, and at some point you may need him this season. So I think it would be really good for them to get him as many snaps as they possibly can if this game gets a little bit lopsided, so he can get out there and kind of learn on the fly. It's one thing practicing. It's another thing being out there in the game in front of all those fans and getting it done. So Dakari Nelson is going to be my young player to watch.
I'm going to go with my young and experienced guy to watch first. Someone who didn't play last week, but out of all the defensive linemen, he's the guy that we think has the best shot to make an impact this year. Came in at this freshman class, and that's Max Granville. And he was the last guy to get in this year. Remember, he reclassified in July, showed up after a family wedding like 3 days before preseason camp, put on some pads, and was sharing the field with a 24-year-old offensive lineman in Sal Wormley. And okay, welcome to the Big Ten. Welcome to Penn State. Good luck to you. We've now heard from about 3 or 4 people within program facilities, most recently yesterday in 6-year senior Smith Vilbert, who's been around a lot of different defensive ends, calling this kid Chop 2.0. Let's see it. Let's get a chance to see it against Bowling Green's offensive tackle. It could be an experienced offensive tackle at the MAC level, but going up against a talent like Max Granville, who you pluck off the high school fields of Texas as one of the more feared edge rushers nationally in that 2025 class before he reclassified, that's still a matchup I'll take. Granville versus an experienced Bowling Green tackle. And I think we'll get some chances to see it. We've seen Max Granville avoid wearing the scout team jersey the last couple of weeks. That's a good sign in terms of involvement. He was on the travel roster, repping down in Morgantown before the game with some of those primary defensive linemen. So Granville's the guy I'd watch. Wouldn't surprise me that if he gets some run, even 10 snaps or so, if he was managed to pick up a sack or a very noticeable QB here, hurry, something where you got a bunch of us in the press box tweeting about it. Oh, Max Granville just flashed. Look at that. Because I think that the door will be open for it. I was tempted to go Cooper Cousins as my savvy veteran pick because he feels like the savvy veteran around campus now. He's going to get a lot of run. I'd imagine he's going to get probably at least about a half's worth of snaps by the end of the day. But I'm going to go and kind of foreshadow Daniel's prediction or piece of it and say Cam Wallace, because once Katron Allen is done knocking down doors and Nick Singleton is done doing his thing, Cam Wallace is going to get a real opportunity to show what he can do as the primary ball carrier in an offense. And I was tempted to go Bo Prabula too, but we've seen pieces of Bo Prabula, and I think we saw more of Bo Prabula last week. Cam Wallace was in that mop-up kind of duty last week. He got some touches. But going back to the blue-white game when we first got eyes on him and what we've heard feedback since then, his blend of physicality, burst, and willingness to embrace contact as a blocker is going to keep him on the field when he gets his chances and when Nick Singleton and Katron Allen ultimately move on with their career. But I think he'll have a shot to maybe log double-digit touches on the day. We've heard so much about his abilities as a natural receiver. It was a position that he probably could have been recruited to the power conference level playing. Maybe we can see a little bit of that in the mix as well. I think by the end of the day, he'll have enough sample size out there to put up some nice stats, maybe get to the end zone. I don't know that we'll get Quentin Martin. Maybe if we do, it'll be a little bit smaller of a sample size. So I'm going with Granville as the young guy and Cam Wallace, who's got one college game under his belt, as kind of a more vocal point pick for players to watch here. All right, fun exercise. Let's dive into our predictions for the score now. And Mark, we'll begin with you.
Back in 1998, number 9 Penn State played host to Bowling Green at Beaver Stadium. The last time the Falcons visited Beaver Stadium, and Penn State won 48-3. Joe Paterno's 300th win. Interestingly enough, Penn State also beat Bowling Green for Joe Paterno's 200th win. This is only going to be James Franklin's 90th win, but I think it's going to come kind of in the same similar easy fashion. I'm going with that same score from back in 98, 48-3. And are we doing players to watch now or bold predictions now?
You have any more players?
No, I have enough.
Yes, yeah. We if you follow our coverage on the site along with our predictions each week, and we give our kind of projected score and our rationale for that. We also give our bold predictions. And I know I was on the money last week. I don't know about you guys. 100+ receiving yards for Harrison Wallace. If you want to toot your own horn for what you predicted too, go for it. But Mark, do lead us off with the bold predictions, and then we'll jump to Daniel Gallen for his predictions.
Yeah, I'm going back to our discussion earlier in the show, and Daniel hit on some of this. I really think that they're going to look to get the ball in Julian Fleming's hands. I think the level of respect from the coaching staff and the fellow players for what that guy did in his first game. And then, they hear some of the buzz about, hey, where was Julian Fleming? What happened? I think they're going to kind of reward him. Drew Aller, I'll bet, is thinking kind of the same thing. So I don't know that they will design specific plays for him, but I bet you that they kind of go out of their way to find him. I'm going to predict that he's going to approach. I don't know if he's going to get there. His career high of 6 receptions in this game. He'll be close. I think maybe 4 or 5, maybe not quite get to 6, but I think he has a big game for him.
Daniel, go ahead.
I think Penn State will win big. I don't think I'm going out on a limb there. I have 48-14. The more I thought about this game, the more I kind of thought I could have bumped that up into the 50s probably, especially when you consider that they scored 63 points against UMass and Delaware last year. But my bold prediction, while we were sitting there, I went back through all of my bold predictions from last year because I was pretty sure that I had made this exact prediction, but I think we just must have made it on the podcast. I didn't have it on print anywhere. My bold prediction is we're going to get a 50-yard touchdown run from Cam Wallace. I felt like there was a ton of time last year where we kept saying, all right, we're going to see Wallace and Montgomery out there. And then it was the Tank Smith show in the fourth quarter. We saw Wallace last week. I thought he was really close to breaking one against West Virginia late. I think that he can probably do that against Bowling Green. I think that he's someone who has a lot of really interesting traits that can play at this level. And I think he's going to get the chance to really show that for the Beaver Stadium crowd.
All right. So yeah, I'm on board with you with Cam Wallace in the spotlight. And so my score, like you guys, I'm not thinking Penn State sweats this out, 45-6. And like you, Daniel, the more I thought about it, I was kind of wondering, should I have bumped that into the 50s? Because Bo Pribula could get some opportunity. And I don't know if Andy Kotelnicki is just going to wildcat it. I think he might want to put some stuff on tape and might want to give Bo some more encouragement and confidence. And some of these games you play all the way through. You don't just take a knee early in the fourth quarter and keep taking knees. So, yeah, we'll see. Again, I'm not trying to just pound down Bowling Green, but I think that's where Penn State is right now in this matchup. I am curious, does Penn State have the defensive depth and willingness down there to keep Bowling Green out of the end zone late? That's always another question when you predict it. But I think that Bowling Green won't score a touchdown on the day. They'll get 2 field goals, one way or the other, maybe earlier in the game. Ultimately, I think that Drew Aller is going to look comfortable in Beaver Stadium, going to build off what we saw last week. And I think you'll see more of those proof of progress in the form of explosive plays. I think, again, you'll get to see a lot of the sideline empty by the time this one gets deep into it. And my bold prediction is scores of touchdowns of 40-plus yards on both sides of the ball. So we saw that last week for the offense. I think we'll see it again. But I think that the defense is going to do something special, whether it's a strip sack and a pickup that's raced back for a touchdown or maybe a pick six down the sideline. They'll get involved with the big splash play, make sure everyone's talking about them another week heading into the bye. But all of us think Penn State improves to 2-0. Each of us predicted that West Virginia would not cover that spread last week. That was, went from 12 to 8, and we all predicted double-digit scoring totals or margins of victory for Penn State. So there we are with our picks. Mark, Daniel, be back with you in the Beaver Stadium press box for the first time since the Blue-White game. We'll be there on Saturday morning, and again, 60% off VIP coverage, and you can join us nice and early with our press box coverage and throughout Saturday and until we get into that post-game podcast mode, Saturday, late afternoon, early evening. Thanks a lot, guys.
Hey, who's the third quarterback who's going to play?
That's a good. Well, I'd imagine it would be Ethan Grunkemeyer, based on. How much did you? I was on defense last night, as you guys know. So you guys got to tell me how much involvement was there for Jackson Smolik, because he was back at practice in his pads. Here we got a quick segment now to tackle. He was back in his pads. He was wearing his 14, but I didn't see him do much of anything. I know he threw a couple balls that turned out last week. How active was he?
He was throwing. He was tossing it around, not quite as much as Grunk, but I'd say we do a quick whip around and say who you think the third quarterback's going to be. Tyler, you start. I'm taking over.
Yeah, I think that. Yeah, I think it'll be Grunk.
Okay, yeah. We'll go in. What is it? I'm trying to clockwise.
Daniel, you go next.
I think Grunkemeyer.
There you go.
I'm going to go with Jack Lambert. I think he's going to be the third quarterback to play. I think they're going to try to reserve that red shirt for Grunk. Remember, they only played Smolik last year in the one game when Pribula hurt his finger or whatever it was, and he came in for like one snap. So yeah. We'll see. It'll be fun to chart the freshman. Your freshman rap piece is going to be much more fun this week than it was last week. Not that it wasn't fun last week, Tyler, but I think it's going to be even more interesting.
That could have been your bold prediction, Mark. Jack Lambert will play third quarterback. But hey, you called your shot here at the end. Daniel, I assume you don't want to just whip out a segment out of your pocket and throw it away. We're good to walk away. All right. Thanks, gentlemen.
I'm good.
I'll see you very soon. On behalf of Daniel and Mark and everyone at Lions 24/7, I'm Tyler Donahue. This has been the Lions 24/7 podcast. We'll talk to you on Saturday.